what did you find yourself immersed in when you were making this album? I mean, creatively, spiritually, musically, what were your influences?
It's interesting because it took so long to make. I was very, I was in and out of a lot of modalities. But I think that some influences that were big on it were just what I listened to it is like The Wiz,
Oh,
and also just Quincy Jones, sort of that kind of pop funk '70s thing. It's a little bit a lot of time changes, things like that, and narrative. And I was also listening to Sufjan Stevens, The Age of Ads specifically, that one album. I remember that, yeah, it's just something like the Midwest. Something was like very
okay.
in the vibe of it. Nina Simone.
I've grown tired, dry and tired, while I wait here on the sun. Or a daughter, or a lie, or just one reason to go. But who, when and how will my vanity take shape? Or is it too late? Is it too late?
Hey everybody, this is Mike, and you're watching the Reelblack podcast. Today we have the honor and privilege of being with a dear friend of mine who is going to be performing. If you're watching this as we present it on May 23rd, 2023, you don't want to miss Terence Nance, Terence, etc., etc., etc. In his first ever live performance of his debut album Vortex this Thursday, May 25th, and Friday, May 26th at Uninon Transfer in Philadelphia. Terence will be supported by musical director Anthony Tidd and a 13-piece band with singer-songwriter Madison McFerrin opening both nights. Welcome to the Reelblack podcast, Terence. It's good to see you again. It's been a minute since we caught up.
I know, a long time. Pre-COVID, probably.
Pre-COVID, I think we said the last time I saw you was at the Black Star premiere for Random Acts of Flyness on camera. I think I've seen you at Black Star since then, of course. But so fill us in about Swarm and Vortex.
Yeah, so Swarm is a show at the ICA, and it collects everything I've been making over the last many years into one place. Obviously mostly cinema and TV, and also a kind of way of kind of trying to install those as environments and make it feel like, the environment is aligning with the prayer of the pieces themselves. So, it's a really great opportunity to do that, work with Maori, obviously, Black Star Projects, who just did an amazing job making it happen. You know, um, yeah, that's the show itself, and then the concert. Miori had asked me if I wanted to do the album live, because my album came out last year, and as live music has been coming back, you know, and as I was finishing the album, I was always sort of daunted by that idea because the album is very dense, or it has a lot of elements, sonically, a lot of instruments, a lot of words. So, it was an opportunity to just challenge myself and dive in at the deep end, essentially, and really try and arrange it, in a way that you can kind of only do when it's in one place. It's not a tour situation. Um, so yeah, just excited to see how it feels and how people receive it.
Yeah, is it going to be the same show both nights, or is it going to be different each night?
It'll be the same. I think, but who knows what's actually gonna happen? I think, but yeah, the set
Well,
list.
you're in the well, as we speak, let's be clear, you're in the midst of rehearsal,
Yeah, yeah.
so it's starting to come together now, and, I guess, are you feeling butterflies, or, like, how does it feel when when you see other people start to interpret your work in that manner?
Um, I would say not so much butterflies. I think being in the middle of it, and we had been rehearsing, kind of in the middle of the rehearsal process, because the last few weeks just sort of making that happen. I think it is you know interesting just to hear other artists, other musicians, interpret what's there, um, and it's all in the name of like trying to respect that the live thing is a different thing than the recorded thing. Just as a dynamic. So I think it's always just like a starting place. So I'm trying to listen. I'm trying to be learning mode myself, especially like learning my voice. Like how to use it. In that modality. So yeah, it's been a journey.
So the album is called Vortex, and you can pick it up, wherever you find music nowadays. You've always made music in addition to making film. I know this, but what's the difference between the two animals in your estimation for you?
I think that they're very different in just what it takes from a resources perspective to achieve them. Um, that's a huge difference. In terms of just how many people you have to talk to get it done. With music, it's a little more. You just talk to your friends on an afternoon kind of vibe. With films, at the very least, in the ways that I've made them, there's only so much. It's not so sustainable because it just takes so much labor to only make films, kind of with friends off the grid. It hasn't felt always sustainable because it just requires so much energy,
Mm.
and then obviously that gets into you got to talk to some companies. You want to make a film, which is that's what that is. With music that can happen obviously, but it hasn't happened to me. And I think that um, it's more just because it theoretically can take less resources to get to something that's still, you know.
Well, it's interesting that you would say that. I mean, because you're of all the people that I know, you're probably the most prolific film artist out there. Um, Not always aiming for commercial, but always getting about adding to your body of work on a very regular and consistent basis. So, I mean, but it sounds to me like maybe you've hit some stumbling blocks from time to time. Is that am I hearing that right? Or
Of course, but no different than anyone else. Like projects, especially in the film world, it's mostly don't get made. You know what I mean? Mostly don't see the light of day, and then and that's not usually for lack of trying. Whereas with music, if you try, it's gonna get done. At least for me, you know what I mean?
so
It's
it's
more
sort of
like
like the actor who paints, or but music was that your first love, or is something you always
um,
did concurrent to the filmmaking, or
I think yeah, it all kind of happened at the same time. I think that I never really separated the two until I sort of understood that the way I made films would require writing in a way, because I sort of approached films and music in the same way that it was just an audio visual um, expressive space. But with writing music, I always just sort of wrote it on the guitar, like wrote it while making it in a way. And with films, that's fine too. I was able to do that kind of initially, but I slowly started to understand some of the ways of writing that weren't writing while doing it. And then I think that, so much of what editing is for both mediums is, for me at least, tapping into the same part of my spirit. You know what I mean? Just like how to use time and sound and dynamics and just ways of affecting the signal, essentially.
Right.
Is those principles kind of end up being very similar or parallel in music and film. Like down to like the actual tools to make them. It's not that much of a difference between you know Logic and Premiere. It's like they're technically the same thing.
May as well get into it. You can talk about it or not. I mean, but I haven't seen you since the whole Space Jam thing happened. And
Mhm.
I would, if I should have called you offline. Just I was curious. Like, I mean, like when it was announced, it was a big thing for us in the indie world to see you get tapped to write and direct Space Jam 2 with LeBron James, and had high expectations for it. And then very shortly in the filming, we heard that you were no longer attached. I mean, do you speak on that involvement, or like what happened exactly? Can you tell us about it?
Yeah, I think I've spoken about it a few times. Definitely not like off limits, at least to me, in any kind of
Okay.
way. You know, um, what happened is, I have a different understanding of it each time. But ultimately, I was making something that was really, I think, and I think why we got to the point of shooting it was because it was a really heartfelt. It was coming from my own, and I think some of the other people involved with its own experiences being, young Black kids, Black boys specifically, um, with a lot of fathers and male role models who understood us in a more traditional athlete, you know, masculine mold, and that existing and that being real and felt. I was an athlete growing up, um, but then also having this other modality of expressing through art, and what from a generational perspective, um, and even in the concepts of masculinity perspective was just not as easy to support or feel was real by like our fathers or our, not necessarily my father, but just like um, the previous generation. So I was telling that story in a way that I felt was very connected to my life and the people's lives I've seen, and even like my people in my family's lives. And I thought that that was the most accessible, biggest, you know, worldwide version of the movie. And I thought, that's why I got greenlit, and why we were shooting it, what we were shooting, and what we were getting in the can. And I think ultimately the studio didn't want that.
Hmm.
So I was the person making that. So obviously
So,
the way of
so,
that to move on from me making
so
it.
was it? What will you go back to working in a studio environment like that with a huge budget and
Absolutely, absolutely. I'm
high high
really
expectations?
good at it. That's one thing I learned is you know um, as a director, writer, director at that scale, working with tools at that scale, you know, I have a fluidity with those tools, and I get to things that I felt like really worked, for me and for I think the world ultimately.
Mm.
So it's all good. Like their loss. You know what I'm saying? Like ultimately, you know what I mean? They,
That
could have
definitely.
been presented, but
Well, no, I
you
appreciate you clearing it up because I mean
what it is.
there's this the studio spin on it would be that is not he's not making commercial work, or he's not making something that we can sell, and and then you see the replacement, which is, or the finished product, I should say, and it's the most, I wouldn't say generic, but the most I gotta find the word, because I don't I like Malcolm Lee, but he is the most commercial minded Black film director this side of Kenya Barris, I think. you know
Yeah, I mean, who knows? I mean, what is directing even in that context? I mean, he made a movie with a character called White She-Devil.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying? Like somewhere in him, is somebody who don't want to do it like the program. So who's to say? You know what I mean? Like I just know that ultimately it's an industry, you know what I mean? And I say this a lot, that industrialization has practices that are designed to make the products that come out off the assembly line, look similar and be, standard. The word you use is generic, but like I always use the example of the Camry, you know what I mean? The 2024
Right.
Camry needs to be kind of similar to the 2023 Camry. You know what I mean?
Okay.
So it's, because the assembly line, it was just a totally Camry.
It works. We know it works, and we can sell it at a certain price.
Yeah, and I think ultimately it's like, not to shit on Toyota, but for the uses of the metaphor, I think it works. But at whatever point they were like, the slip mat is killing people because it's holding the accelerator down, and we shipped millions of these things. You know what I mean?
Right.
Then you're like, that's the moment you realize it's like, oh, maybe there should be a more aggressive intervention on what the chemistry is, or global warming. Maybe we shouldn't have been doing this. You know what I mean? Like, there's a lot of harm in homeostasis that gets hidden in it. And I think that's ultimately the thing. Like,
what was your vision that was making them so uncomfortable? If you were coming in on schedule and everything was going the way that it was written and everybody signed off on, at what point do they get uncomfortable? Like, teach me so when I get in the driver's seat, they don't,
I think my opinions about that would just be opinions. I don't really know. It felt like every thing was both and, like deep comfort, deep acceptance, really love for what I was doing and what the whole team was doing and putting forth. And then in the same breath, like deep levels of fear. So I don't, it's just like when somebody's having an ambivalent response to something, it's like, I'm just left with which is it? I don't really know, but I've been ambivalent before too. So
but they didn't cause any. So it sounds like you came out of it okay. So
yeah.
Spirits whose names we know and don't, our ancestors. May the work we make embody play. May it have a being of its own, sentient, breathing, aflame.
Spiritual practice and creative practice. Watching Random Acts of Flyness season 2, I see deep spiritual messaging. I would say is the word, like you're definitely inviting ancestors into your realm when you're creating, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Can you speak to your creative practice as it relates to your spiritual practice?
Yeah, I think my journey is to try and make them the same thing. You know what I mean? Like that. And I think mostly when I feel connected to anybody's work or any work that's coming through to the earth realm, the thing I'm connecting with is connection to any kind of ethereal beings or reality, because that's the mystery, that's the thing that's hardest to evidence. When we hear a song, or when I hear a song that like puts me in a different energy, like we all do it. It's like, I'm trying to work out, I'm trying to run this extra mile or whatever. And then a song comes on. It's like, suddenly you have the energy to run. You know what I mean? And I think it's almost casual how much, the spirit world works through melodies and through sound waves, and how like essentially the musicians are just organizing that. But it goes down to the level of speech, it's like you hear James Baldwin talking, what I mean? It's as much about how he's manipulating the sound waves to kind of work on your consciousness as it is what's being said, for example. So I think that the spiritual practice is about tuning that channel, so that the tools, mainly my body and my mind, are receptive to the presence of, spiritual beings. And, what they want to say, what they want to be about. I think it just becomes about like the hard thing in the Western world is just, and I think with Random Acts is kind of asking that question is how do we get back to rituals that don't obey the logic of, you know, Western modes of being or Western knowledge, Western science, you know, because ritual can feel so simple and so indirect, you know, as a modality of affecting your mood or your day to day or your, you know, conflicts or anything like that. It feels so like counterintuitive to the material, you know, just really science, you know, like what's observable essentially. Like I did this and observed this, you know what I mean?
Right. Well, I've heard you talk a lot about flow state and wanting to maintain that.
Mhm.
I mean, can you speak to that a little bit in relation to this? Or?
Yeah, I mean, I think that like that's a good example of, you know, one thing I've tried and failed so many times and tried again to do is just like figure out what routines, especially with my environment, like facilitate that feeling of being in a channeling modality, you know, or flow state when making things, or writing or making music or, and also I would say the biggest question now is like how to do it, how to be in that state with other people together, you know.
Right.
You always see it like when a band is in that dynamic or a basketball team or like, you know, it feels like you see it in so many different moments, but it's vulnerable, you know, to open ourselves up to each other and our spiritual connections to create a flow state together. So I guess the thing I'm always thinking about is like, what is the ritual? What is the daily practice that supports that? You know what I mean?
All right. Well, you certainly have that with Sean Peters, that
Yes.
relationship, you know, your cinematographer.
Mhm.
I mean, is it, does it get easier or do you get more ambitious as you develop your practice um, to
It
connect
definitely,
and make things happen?
it definitely doesn't get easier. I don't. I think because it gets more spacious or capable, then like ultimately we get more ambitious about what we're trying to do. You know what I mean? So like it's always like stretching the edge of where we're at. You know what I mean? In that sense, um, you know, with season 2, for instance, you know, everybody who sees it, not everybody, but like at least a few people who saw it, like told me that it feels like so much, like we had so much more money, you know, things like
Hmm.
that. And I'm like, nope. It's like, it's just we obviously got more, we were more ambitious and got a little bit more adept at, you know, using the tools that we had. I
Hmm.
think specifically a lot of why it seems more resources because of, you know, Sean's level of capacity to experience to express emotion through the images, through the colors, through the way things are lit on the fly. It's just so much more. It's
You're
more
developing a language over time.
exactly, exactly.
Will there be a season 3?
There's no plans for one right now, you know, but
Okay,
I never say never.
got you. But all that stuff is on, well, they don't call it HBO Max anymore. It's called Max. And you
Yeah, I
can,
don't know what's going on over there.
well, your stuff is still up. People
Yeah,
can pay the subscription and catch every single episode of that. People can go to the ICA in Philadelphia for the next few weeks and catch Swarm, which is your debut solo exhibition. Is there a catalog? That would make it a reason for me to go. Oh my goodness! All right, hopefully they'll be at the show too. All right, I need like 3 of those
get
for
them
real.
on.
All right. I got to show up and I have to get the Swarm catalog. All right. Um, which you can probably only get in Philly at the time. So you want the Swarm catalog, you want the Swarm experience, you want the Vortex experience. And if you can't be there this Thursday, May 25th or Friday, May 26th at Union Transfer, um, you can solicit this gentleman to go on tour. All right, we left that open. All right. just pushing you a little bit. We
I'm
want to
going on tour in the future.
we want a Terence Etc.
Yes.
tour, the Terence Etc. experience.
Yes, coming to a town near you.
At the very least, put on your headphones and stream or buy the album.
Wherever music is experienced, it's available.
I won't about face and regress to a lust in our past. In our past. In our past. In our past.